My name is Karlyn Borysenko, and you are listening to the Actively Unwoke podcast. So today I want to address one of the most common questions that I get from parents all the time. At least once a week, I will get a parent asking me this question. They say, Karlyn, I called the school and I asked them, are you teaching critical race theory? And they swear that they are not teaching critical race theory in the classroom. They assured me it is not happening at our school. Do I believe them? Are they telling me the truth? Now, before I answer that question, I do just want to remind you that I am in the midst of a crowdfunding program because I want to train 10,000 parents how to find out exactly what the schools are teaching their kids using publicly available information. You can currently find the Schools Exposed program on Indiegogo. I'm raising money to give me the time and the resources in order to build the training program on there. So search Schools Exposed on Indiegogo or head over to unwokearmy.com/parents. That will redirect you right to the campaign. You can learn all about it. But central to this question is something I'm going to address in the Schools Exposed program, but it's important to get it out there now. The greatest weapon that the woke left have to use against us is that they manipulate the language. They get nitpicky about the definitions. They get nitpicky about the terms. And when a term reaches the public consciousness, as critical race theory has, they change the definition of the term or they invent a new term for it entirely. And so when you call the school and you say, are you teaching critical race theory in the classroom? One of the most common responses you're going to get is, no, of course not. We're not teaching critical race theory in the classroom. Critical race theory isn't taught in K through 12 education. It's only taught in law schools. It is a legal practice, not something that you teach to kids. And they're lying to you. Well, if you look at it in their nitpicky way, I'm sure that they don't believe that they're lying to you because, again, they're nitpicking at the language. It is very true that critical race theory as a concept was created and is currently taught today in law school. However, that does not mean that the components of critical race theory are not making their way into the classroom. They absolutely are. And it is absolutely being taught in K through 12 classrooms in sometimes as young as pre-kindergarten, 4 years old. And I'm going to tell you how they do it. They take specific concepts and they insert those concepts into the curriculum. Let me give you an example. The concept of equity. Now, we all used to be able to wrap our heads around the idea of equality, right? This is what Martin Luther King talked about when he said, I have a dream that my children will be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. What he meant is that everyone shows up, and regardless of your race or your gender or any of the other things, everyone gets a fair opportunity to have access to the job or the position on the team or the spot in the play or what have you. We have a quality of opportunity that is not inhibited by our immutable characteristics, the things that we are born with. That is the concept of equality. That is what used to be taught in schools. In some, well, many if we're honest, but not all, to be fair, in many schools today, they don't teach equality anymore. They teach the concept of equity. And equity is not about equality of outcome. It is not about equality of opportunity. It is about equality of outcome. It is about making sure that everyone ends in the same place. This is a fundamentally Marxist concept. Marx said, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. It is the very definition of redistribution of resources based on perceived need, and how a lot of these school districts, if you look at their policies, particularly their equity policy, they're defining equity as we're going to assign resources based on those who have the greatest need. And most often, they are addressing need based on race or based on gender or based on sexual orientation or based on gender identity. Now, sometimes, to be fair, they're also doing it based on socioeconomic status as well. But in the schools that are addressing need based on socioeconomic status, it's most often because they're trying to get at what they perceive to be the poor Black kids. That's not my definition. That's their definition. I'm pushing that on you from reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of policy documents. I know how they define these things. Anyway, that's one way in which they're taking a component of critical race theory and they're inserting it into the curriculum. Now, here is the most important thing I'm going to tell you in this entire podcast. If your school has an Office of Equity, then they are almost certainly teaching critical race theory in the classroom. It's not 100%, but let's say 9 out of 10, 90% of the time, if they have an Office of Equity, they are almost always teaching critical race theory in the classrooms. The exception to this is occasionally I come across a school district that does have an Office of Equity. However, they're not defining equity based on equality of outcome. They're defining it based on equality of opportunity. So they're actually doing equality. They just don't know it because equity is kind of like a fad term right now. And so they're using the term, but they're not actually defining it in the correct way. And so they're not actually teaching it. That's a rare exception. It does happen. I've seen it in a couple of different places. It's wonderful when that happens. We celebrate when that happens. But most of the time, if your school has an Office of Equity, they are also teaching critical race theory. If your school, here's another one we want to perceive as interchangeable, anti-racism. If your school says, we're not teaching critical race theory, we're just teaching anti-racism, they're the same thing. They are, practically speaking, the exact same thing from a functional perspective. And actually, if we're getting into anti-racism, we can talk about how in How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi actually argues for present-day discrimination against white people to make up for discrimination in the past against Black people. That is the very definition of equality versus equity. So when you ask the schools, are they teaching critical race theory? And they say, no, we're not doing that. We're doing equity, we're doing anti-racism, we're doing diversity, we're doing social justice. They're absolutely teaching critical race theory. Now, it's important though, I look at this problem from a highly practical perspective. So when I'm looking at, is the school teaching critical race theory, I'm not always adhering to the very rigid definitions that we might put around what is critical race theory. And I'll give you the definition of critical race theory just in case you haven't listened to my podcast on that yet. Critical race theory is an ideology that started in academia in the 1970s that says racism exists everywhere, in every person, in everything, in every interaction and institution. And the job of the critical race theorist is to explore how, not if, how racism occurred in any circumstance, because racism is always assumed to have occurred. Now, that's my definition. I wrote that definition. You can use that definition or another one. I don't really care. But the point is that I'm looking at this from how it practically manifests in the real world. And sometimes for the purpose of getting at the root core of the problem in the schools or in the woke left ideology, I might play with definitions. I'm much more concerned about what is actually happening in the classroom. What are students actually experiencing? What are students actually learning? What is the curriculum that teachers are actually teaching? I'm much more interested in getting to the core of the problem than I am in putting together the most perfect scholarly definition of critical race theory or equity or anti-racism or anything else. And so because of that, you might be hearing different things from me than you might be hearing from some of the more academic people involved in the anti-woke space. Some people define critical race theory completely different than me. They define it based around critical social justice, academic literature, all this stuff. And that's perfectly fine too. I actually don't think we have to say this is right and this is wrong. I think both definitions have their place. But what I'm trying to articulate is that I think that in order to defeat this ideology in a highly practical sense, we need to be loose with our definitions because we need to be more concerned about what people are actually experiencing than did we get the most perfect scholarly definition. And the reason that we want to do this is because the left is doing this too. The left changes the definitions of words all the time. When critical race theory started getting a lot of heat in the national media, when Chris Rufo really started banging that term into everyone's head, do you know what the woke left did? They changed the name of critical race theory to culturally responsive teaching. They didn't even bother to change the acronym. Anytime you hear culturally responsive teaching, that is a code word for critical race theory. And so a school can very literally say, we're not doing critical race theory, we're just doing culturally responsive teaching. Well, in regards to the components that they are teaching in the classroom, it's the exact same thing. It's no different in terms of what actually shows up in what the students are learning. If your school is teaching the 1619 Project, they are teaching critical race theory. If your school is teaching the Black Lives Matter curriculum, they are absolutely, unequivocally teaching critical race theory. If your school is teaching how to be an anti-racist, even if it's just for a teacher book club, they are absolutely teaching critical race theory. If your school has an equity department, a diversity department, an inclusion department, a belongingness department, a anti-racism department, I mean, really, one of the things you need to do is figure out who's in charge of equity or diversity and equity and inclusion and justice. You need to figure out who's in charge of it at the school. But if they have a department like that, in 90% of cases, they are teaching critical race theory. Your school is going to play with language. They're going to nitpick because remember, most of the teachers and the administrators at your school have been indoctrinated into this ideology, and most of them do not realize what it really is. So they're going to nitpick. They're going to play with language. They're going to pretend they're doing one thing and it's a completely innocent thing, and you as parents don't even need to worry about it, when in fact they're doing a completely different thing. So, what I would do is I would, call them and ask them, see what they say, get the typical answer. I have not yet, by the way, for the amount of curriculum that I have from public schools on my computer right now, I have yet to hear from a single parent who called the schools and asked them if they're teaching critical race theory. And the school's like, yeah, we're teaching it. Here's exactly what we're doing. The schools always lie. They always lie. They always say they're not teaching it. But when we look at the materials, when we look at the classroom materials, we know that they are. If they are teaching any of these tangential concepts, then don't worry about the definitions. Worry about the outcome. Worry about your kids learning racial stereotypes, because that's what critical race theory really is. Let's just cut to the chase. Critical race theory is racial stereotyping. Gender ideology is gender stereotyping. They are learning stereotypes. They are learning to treat people differently based on the color of their skin. They are learning to look at girls that are tomboys, that are just tomboys, and say, you weren't born a girl, you were really born a boy, because you don't fit a typical girl stereotype. These teachers are teaching people stereotypes in the name of justice. How messed up is that? How messed up is that? So you've got to be really mindful of looking at your students' curriculum. Go onto the website. Go onto your school district's website, not the school itself. Start at the district level, just because most of these things do happen at the district level. And just do a quick search for equity in their search bar. See what comes up. Do a quick search for anti-racism in the search bar on the school district website. See what comes up. I once did a search for equity on the website for the school district for the Portland, Oregon public schools. Thousands of search results came up when we searched for equity. Thousands. And we're not talking financial equity here. That's not what it is. It was equity in the classroom. And that has been true on almost every single school website that I have ever looked at. So go in to your discussions with the school, having done this homework. Just look around their website and see what comes up when you search for these common terms. And then you're going to be able to go in with a much better position to say, are you teaching critical race theory? Because this equity stuff kind of looks the same as what I mean when I say critical race theory. And then they might say, oh, well, you just don't know what critical race theory is. You got the definition wrong. We're just teaching accurate history. No, they're not. No, they're not. They are teaching a skewed version of history based on what the ideology wants you, or more aptly, your children, to understand. So always approach anything that the school tells you with a certain amount of skepticism. And like I said, and I truly do mean this, I don't try to be an alarmist about these things. I try to look at this in a nuanced way. And there are absolutely school districts that I've looked at. Rochester, New York comes to mind, actually. There are absolutely school districts that I have looked at and investigated that they have equity offices, they have equity professionals, but they're not actually teaching it in the way that many schools are defining it. They're not defining it in the same way. So understanding their definitions and, creating space for the fact that they might not be teaching it, they really might not be, that's going to be best. It's probably being taught, but there is a chance that it's not. And again, most of the time when I find a school district that is the exception to the rule, it's because they're defining it as equality and not equity. But in most cases, you've got to get at their definitions. Look at their policy manuals. If the school says, well, we're not teaching critical race theory, we just look at everything from an equity lens. They love the term equity lens. Then ask them what their equity lens is. What does an equity lens mean? Are you normalizing outcomes? Are you making sure, this is a great question to ask them. Are you distributing resources based on perceived need? I'm going to say that again. Are you distributing resources? Are you allocating budget based on perceived student need? If they're doing that, and that sounds like a good thing, by the way, I want to acknowledge that. It sounds like a good thing to say, we're just going to make sure all the students have what they need. Isn't that nice that all the students would have what they need? It does sound nice, doesn't it? And I'm sure everyone listening to this wants students to have what they need. But what you need to hear is that is school code word language for we're teaching a quality of outcomes instead of a quality of opportunity. We're actually allocating taxpayer money based on a Marxist concept. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That's Marx. That's what they're doing. And they wrap it up in a nice little bow to make it sound nice when parents call and ask them what they're doing. So give it a try. Call your school. Even if you don't have kids, I would actually be fascinated. Even if I don't have kids, I think about this stuff all the time. You don't need to have kids to get into this game, right? Call the school in the town where you pay taxes and say, I'm curious, are you teaching critical race theory? No, we're not teaching that. Oh, do you have an equity office? Oh, yes, we do have that. Oh, are you teaching anti-racism? I've heard that a lot of schools are teaching anti-racism. See what they say. And then ask them for definitions. Go on their website, look around for documents, and see what squares out as true for you. If you would like more information about what these terms mean, again, I'm going to be building out an entire language module in the program that I'm developing for parents to help them understand what the schools are really teaching their kids. So again, you can support that by going and searching for the Schools Exposed program on Indiegogo. You can also get a redirect from there by going to unwokearmy.com/parents. And if you want more information about the definitions, I actually do have 2 chapters in my book, Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life, that lays out the definitions and it lays out the mindset of the woke progressive left. So you might find that as a really valuable resource. You can learn more and order your copy in hardcover, Kindle, or audio version at activelyunwoke.com. That's all I've got for this time. If you enjoyed this podcast, I hope you will consider supporting the work I'm doing. You can find out more about how you can do that at activelyunwoke.com/support. And please consider leaving a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting platform you're listening on. It really does help me out, and I greatly appreciate it. That's all I've got for right now. I'll talk to you next time.